It was the middle of October when I got the call. The leaves had started to change, carpeting the sidewalks in amber and rust, and the air carried that cool bite that hinted at the fast-approaching winter. I had just moved out of my apartment in Denver, burned out from a job that hadn't panned out, a relationship that had fizzled to silence, and the kind of city loneliness that clung to you like wet clothes. When Aunt Caroline called and said, "Why don't you come stay at the cabin for a while? Clear your head?" It felt like she had read my thoughts. Her cabin was tucked away in the Colorado mountains, 2 hours off the main road, a stretch of winding gravel and pine-sweet air that always felt like time paused the moment you stepped onto her porch. Caroline had owned the place for decades, a retreat she shared with no one except, occasionally, me. Growing up, she was the mysterious one, older sister to my late father, never married, independent to the bone, and beautiful in a way that never faded, only changed form, regal and unreadable. Even as a boy, I'd watched her with an odd reverence, her movements fluid, her voice always cool and melodic, like someone who had figured life out and needed no one's permission to enjoy it. She greeted me on the porch in a thick knit sweater and jeans, a mug of something steaming in her hand. Her silver-streaked hair was tied back loosely, wind-tousled, and her sharp, knowing eyes studied me with a kind of amused warmth that made me feel oddly exposed. "You look tired," she said, no preamble. Her voice was the same, soft, low, and precise. I smiled faintly, stepping up to her. "Yeah, that obvious?" She tilted her head and sipped from the mug, still studying me. "You always wore your feelings on your face, even when you were 5. Her eyes flicked down, taking me in as she stepped aside to let me in. "Come in. Fire's going. You can pick your room." The cabin was warm and familiar, the faint scent of pine logs and something floral I couldn't place, lavender or eucalyptus. Her touch was everywhere, from the thick rugs underfoot to the carved wooden bowls filled with polished stones. I dropped my duffel bag near the stairs, rubbed the back of my neck. I wasn't used to quiet like this. She walked ahead of me into the living room, her hips swaying in a way that still held grace, even at her age. It struck me. How composed she was, how unhurried, even alluring in that untouchable way. It wasn't just age that had shaped her. It was solitude, and the way she wore it like armor. "Want something to drink?" she asked over her shoulder. "Sure, whatever you're having." She poured us both a small glass of port, dark red and heavy in the glass. We sat by the fire, the evening settling around us like a quilt. Outside, the trees whispered in the wind, and inside, only the soft crackle of flame and our breathing filled the silence. "So," she said after a while, one leg crossed over the other, her foot bare and elegant in the firelight. "What did she do to you?" I looked up, caught off guard. "What?" Her lips curved in that signature half-smile. "Whoever she was. The woman you left behind." I stared at the glass, swirling the port once before taking a long sip. It wasn't her. Or maybe it was. I don't know. Everything just kind of fell apart. Caroline leaned back, one arm draped over the armrest. The firelight etched shadows across her cheekbones, and her eyes, deep-set and intelligent, never left mine. Falling apart is the beginning of becoming something new, but it hurts like hell. I gave a dry laugh. "You should write that down." She shrugged. "I lived it." We sat for another long moment. The quiet between us wasn't awkward, just full, weighted. Her presence was grounding in a way I hadn't remembered. There was something about the curve of her lips, the way she watched me. Not motherly, Not aunt-like, exactly. Something else, or something less defined, less safe. You know, she said softly. I asked you here for more than just company. I turned to her, unsure what to say. She continued, her voice low. There's something I've been wanting to do for a while, something I need help with. My mouth was suddenly dry. What kind of help? She stood then, slow and deliberate, setting her glass down on the side table. Something we'll talk about tomorrow. For now, just be here. There was a finality in her tone, like she was closing a door without locking it. She reached out then, almost absently, and brushed her fingers through my hair. Gentle, slow. A gesture more intimate than it had any right to be. I froze, unsure whether to lean into the touch or pull away. Her fingers lingered just a moment longer than necessary before she turned, her sweater swaying softly as she moved to the stairs. Good night, Jessie, she said, her voice already trailing. I watched her ascend, the hem of her sweater rising slightly with each step, the shadows playing along her figure until she disappeared from view. I sat there long after, my glass untouched, the fire dying low. The scent of her still clung in the air, clean, warm, and vaguely floral. My thoughts, once so tangled and dark, now circled one thing only. What did she mean by that? That night, I barely slept. The wind picked up outside, and with every creak of the wood or sigh of the trees, I thought I heard her moving upstairs. I could see her in my mind, her face, her posture, her eyes. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to run from the quiet. I wanted to understand what she was really asking of me. But I already knew it was going to change everything. Morning arrived with a cold clarity, the kind that settled deep into the bones and made you aware of your heartbeat in your chest. The cabin was quiet when I stepped downstairs, wrapped in a heavy flannel, and the scent of fresh coffee that hung in the air like a memory. Aunt Caroline was already seated at the kitchen table, the window beside her, wide open, letting in a breeze that tousled the ends of her pale hair as she read a worn book with one leg folded beneath her. She looked up when she saw me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke, as if something unspoken had lingered overnight, stretching between us across the polished wood floor and the steaming mugs. "Did you sleep?" she asked, her voice as smooth and composed as ever. But her gaze held a glint of something. Curiosity, maybe? Or anticipation? I nodded slowly, though it wasn't true. Not really. I kept thinking about what you said. She smiled faintly, closing her book and leaning back, her fingers curled around the mug like they were drawing warmth from it and storing it somewhere deep inside. I told you, she said softly. I needed help with something. The way she said it made it clear that it wasn't anything mundane, not a task you could write down on a list or check off with a hammer and nails. It was something that required trust, intimacy, not the kind that came from blood ties, but from proximity, from watching a person quietly over the years and wondering what they held back when the lights were off. I'm listening, I said, because I was. She rose then, slow and precise, setting her mug down with care before turning toward the hallway that led to the old study, her room of keepsakes and strange, beautiful clutter. Come with me. The room hadn't changed, a patchwork of her life unfolded across the walls, old photographs, postcards from forgotten places, dried herbs hanging near the windows, their scent faint and sweet. She knelt in front of an old cedar trunk and opened it with both hands, her fingers grazing the worn brass latch as if waking something from sleep. Inside there were layers of fabric, journals, and carved boxes. She lifted one, a narrow black box with a velvet lining, and turned to me with a solemnity I hadn't seen in her before. "This belonged to my mother," she said, voice hushed. "Your grandmother. You never met her, but she had gifts, sensitivities, things she passed on to me." I frowned, not understanding, but I stepped closer, drawn by the way her hands cradled the box, how her fingers trembled slightly at the edges. "She believed in energies," Caroline went on, lifting the lid. "In connection, in transference, between people, between generations." Inside was a pendant, shaped like a teardrop, dark blue stone veined with silver that shimmered in the morning light. "She told me that some things have to be passed deliberately, through choice, through contact." I looked at her, unsure where this was going, but already feeling the heat creeping into the back of my neck. "And you want to pass this on?" Caroline smiled then, but it wasn't just warmth. It was memory, and hunger, and something unguarded. "Not yet. First, you have to understand what it means, what it asks of you." I watched her cross the room and place the pendant against my palm. Her fingers closed over mine, slow, certain, and unyielding. I felt it then. Not a spark, not some mystical thrill, but a thrum, like touching something alive beneath the skin of the world. Her eyes were close now, searching mine with an intensity that made the air between us feel thin. "I brought you here for this," she whispered, and for a moment she didn't seem older than me. Not by decades, but rather suspended in a moment I couldn't quite define. "We need to spend time together. Focused time, physical time." I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but she placed a finger over my lips, her nail grazing the curve of my skin with unsettling delicacy. "Don't speak yet," she murmured. "Just trust the moment." She moved closer until the scent of her skin, lavender and cedar, wind and firewood, wrapped around me. Her hand lifted to my face, cupping it with reverence, her thumb trailing slowly along my cheekbone, not hurried, not hesitant. "This isn't about family anymore," she said, her voice so low it barely registered as sound, more like a breath shared between us. I didn't flinch, didn't move, because part of me, some quiet buried part, had been waiting for this, or something like it, long before I knew what it was. "I never had children," she continued, her fingers still brushing my jaw. "I never had a marriage, but I've had connection, powerful ones, rare ones, and this, whatever this is between us, it's not something I can ignore." Her words weren't a confession. They were a statement of need, of inevitability. She stepped back then, just enough to give space, her eyes never leaving mine. "I want to show you something tonight," she said. "At the lake, after dark. Come prepared to feel something." Then she turned, leaving the room with the pendant in my palm and a heartbeat that no longer felt like my own. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I wanted to find out. The sun dipped low by the time I made my way through the grove behind the cabin, the sky above melting into bands of rose gold and smoke blue, a hush settling over the forest that made each step feel like it pressed into something sacred. The trail wound downward, soft with pine needles, and the air grew colder with each breath, scented with damp earth and the distant memory of rain. And yet, even with the descending darkness, I felt no fear, only a strange, electric expectancy that moved in my chest like something alive. Ahead, the lake opened up like a mouth of obsidian glass, perfectly still, reflecting the first pricks of starlight, and standing near the edge, her back to me, was Caroline. She wore a shawl the color of dried blood over a simple black dress that swayed in the wind, and her hair, silver and unbound, glimmered in the pale light like strands of frost. She didn't turn when I approached, but I felt her awareness bloom outward the moment I stepped onto the rocks near the shoreline, like she had been waiting, like she had known the precise second my foot would meet the ground. "I used to come here with your father," she said softly, her voice trailing over the water like smoke. "He was just a boy then, and I was already living in that strange space between womanhood and whatever comes after, too old for youth, too wild for the life our parents wanted." She turned then slowly, and when our eyes met, there was something unfathomable in her gaze. Not sadness, not nostalgia, but a kind of hungry truth that stripped away any idea of who she was supposed to be to me. "I brought you here because I saw something in you," she said, stepping toward me, the shawl slipping slightly from one shoulder, revealing the pale curve beneath. Not just blood, not just resemblance, but something shared, something broken and searching, something that calls out to be answered. I stood frozen, the night air cool against my face, my breath shallow, because I could feel her, feel the pull of her body, the warmth that radiated in slow pulses, like a tide drawing everything inward. She reached for my hands then, pulling them between hers, her thumbs brushing the skin of my palms with maddening gentleness, and her eyes didn't look away for a second. "You've been touched by disappointment, Jessie," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You've been pulled thin by people who didn't see the ache under your words, the craving behind your silences. I know what that's like." Her words didn't just land, they sank, threading through the places in me I didn't let anyone see, and I realized with uncomfortable clarity that this woman knew more about my loneliness than anyone I'd ever met. "You think I asked you here for company," she whispered, stepping closer, her body almost brushing against mine. "But I asked you here because I wanted to give you something that can't be spoken." Her hand lifted to my chest, fingers splayed, and I could feel the heat of her palm through my shirt, feel it thrumming into me like a second heartbeat. "This," she said, voice shaking slightly, "this is the moment you either walk away or you surrender to it." I swallowed hard because everything inside me screamed that the moment had come undone from time, that nothing that followed would belong to the rules we had lived by before. "Why me?" I asked. Not out of fear, but need. Need to understand. Need to believe that this impossible tether between us had been real from the beginning. She leaned in then so slowly it felt like the air around us stilled, her lips brushing the corner of my jaw, a breath softer than fog slipping against my skin. "Because I see you," she whispered. "Not the boy you were, or the man the world tried to shape, but the one beneath it all." Her hands slid up to my shoulders, and she pressed her forehead gently to mine, eyes closing, a quiet sigh escaping her lips that seemed to pull me with it. We stood like that, the wind moving around us, the lake silent and infinite, and in that space between one heartbeat and the next, I felt something shift. Her fingers moved down my arms, slow, warm, reverent, like she was memorizing me through touch, and when she stepped back, she began to unfasten the pendant from around her neck, the same one she'd placed in my hand earlier that day. She took my wrist and tied it there, gently, the stone cool against my skin, pulsing faintly with the rhythm of my breath. "This will carry what we begin tonight," she said, brushing her lips across my temple, her voice a whisper of silk and flame. She guided me down onto the earth then, her shawl spread beneath us, the lake to our side like a watching eye, and her body beside mine, warm, steady, ageless, felt like something ancient and sacred. She didn't kiss me yet. She let her fingers glide along my jaw, tracing every line, every place where tension lived, and then down my throat, pausing at my collarbone, where she let her hand rest. "You've been touched by others," she said quietly, "but no one's ever seen you. I want you to let me see you." Her breath mingled with mine, and when she leaned in again, her lips brushed against my cheek, so slowly, so deliberately, that I felt the tremble in her fingers before I felt it in myself. We lay there, neither rushing, neither hiding, and when she finally kissed me, once soft and knowing, it was like being pulled into something I'd always feared, but never questioned. The kiss didn't ask, it told, and in its telling, everything changed. The hours that followed that first kiss didn't unfold so much as they bled, one into the next, time stretching and folding around us until the forest and the lake and even our names felt like echoes from a place we had already left behind. Caroline didn't speak after that moment, not because there was nothing left to say, but because words had become too small for the kind of contact we were moving toward. Her hand found mine again, warm and patient, and she laced our fingers together as though anchoring me to something I hadn't yet learned to hold. The air around us thickened, not with storm or fear, but with anticipation, a suspended hush that made even the trees seem to lean closer, listening. She guided my hand slowly to her chest, where her heart beat just beneath the fabric of her dress, and held it there, her eyes never leaving mine, her breath growing deeper, more deliberate, as if she was inviting me to listen to her body the way others only ever heard her voice. "This is where it starts," she murmured. And the truth in that simple phrase struck me harder than I expected. Not because I doubted it, but because it felt like something I'd always known, but had never dared to admit. Her fingers found the edge of my shirt and rested there, not pushing, not pulling, only existing, waiting, until I leaned into the invitation and placed my forehead against hers. When I closed my eyes, everything else dropped away. The lake, the night, the years between us. And all that remained was the warmth of her breath mingling with mine, and the way her thumb traced gentle, infinite circles over the back of my hand. We kissed again. And this time, it wasn't soft or slow. It was sure. Her lips moved with a precision that spoke not of hesitation, but of memory, of mastery, of something long withheld, and finally given voice. Her mouth opened to mine, and her hand slid around the back of my neck, holding me there as though afraid I might disappear. And I understood in that moment that we had already crossed into something neither of us would be able to undo. The kiss deepened, not rushed, but certain, and I felt the press of her body against mine, subtle at first and then unmistakable, as though her entire frame had folded against me like heat into skin. I let my hands move, one to her waist, and the other along the length of her spine, feeling every slight shift, every breath, every tremble that passed through her, as if it belonged to me now. She leaned back slightly, her lips hovering over mine, and in her eyes I saw the storm she had never let anyone name. A lifetime of unspoken wants, of quiet, chosen solitude, now shattered by the weight of a connection neither of us had expected. "I've waited too long to be careful," she whispered, her fingers sliding into my hair, pulling me close again. And I kissed her harder this time, pulled her into me until there was no distance left to collapse. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, exploring each other with hands and mouths, and silences so full they pressed deeper than any sentence could. And when we finally broke apart, gasping softly, foreheads pressed, her fingers still curled around the fabric of my shirt, the air between us buzzed with the clarity of a storm just past. The line had been crossed, not by accident, not by mistake, but with complete, deliberate awareness. There was no shame, no confusion, just the quiet aftermath of something inevitable finally allowed to bloom. Caroline's head rested on my shoulder, her breathing slow and steady, and I held her there, arms wrapped around her, our bodies still warm from what we had done, what we had chosen. She didn't speak for a long time, and neither did I. There was no need. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of what we had given each other. What we could never take back. What we didn't want to.